Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Scrubbed In Show. I hope you've all been keeping well. This week we have with us another incredible guest. We have with us Dr. Janak joining us, who is a director at KPMG involved in digital health transformation and has also authored an incredible book about unlocking the potential of AI in healthcare. He does have a clinical background, experience in the corporate sector and consultancy, so a lot to cover. Absolute pleasure having you on the show today, Janak. How are you?
Hi Abdul, hi Ams. Yeah, I'm doing well. Hope you are too. And thanks for inviting me to be on the podcast.
No worries. I know you are in a very different place in your career to where you started off, but we want to take it all the way to the very beginning. Tell us, a bit more about your motivation to study medicine, the motivation to become a clinician, and kind of bring us up to speed.
Sure. Yeah, happy to do that. So, just in terms of a bit of background about my career and where I am now. So, I've been working in healthcare for more than 17 years. I started off my working life as a doctor in the NHS, and I left clinical practice back in 2008. And over the sort of 14 years since leaving clinical practice, I've done a variety of things within healthcare. This includes working for large and SME management consulting firms, freelancing as a consultant, working in operational roles, and also
Mhm.
for a health tech startup in London. I got interested in technology and startups while doing my MBA and getting involved in the Cambridge ecosystem. In 2017, I co founded a niche AI consulting startup based out of Sri Lanka.
Mhm.
Over the last 4 or 5 years, I've been more focused on the digital and data side of healthcare. And as part of that, last year I completed a master's degree in data science. And as you mentioned, I published a book
Mhm.
about AI in healthcare, which explores the potential of AI in healthcare, challenges to successful implementation, and how to do things better. I'm now a director at KPMG, where I lead our health data and analytics work in the UK. And thinking back in terms of the motivation to study medicine and become a doctor, I grew up and went to school in Sri Lanka.
Mhm.
And being a doctor was one of those things, along with being an engineer or lawyer, that everybody aspires to be, especially if you're doing reasonably well academically in school. My mom was a doctor, so although she didn't actively push me into that career, I think it probably had some level of influence.
Mhm.
And generally, I wanted to help people, and thought medicine was quite a cool way of doing so. In terms of kind of transitioning then from medicine into consulting,
Yeah.
um, yeah, so my personality is such that I like a lot of variety in the work I do. And in Sri Lanka, medicine is quite a general and varied career. So even if you're specialize or become a surgeon, there's still a amount of general work that you do. Whereas in the UK, when I started med school, I kind of quickly realized how specialized things were. And
Mm.
at that time, I was kind of interested in becoming cardiothoracic surgeon, and what I realized was that if I became that, it would mean sort of focusing on one of the four valves in the heart system. And I found that quite an interesting sort of trajectory, and it just wasn't for me personally. And I wanted to kind of finish my training to a stage where it made sense, and it kind of I had choice to come back
Yeah.
if I needed to. So I finished my foundation year trainings. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, so I looked around and talked to some people, and I thought I'll give consulting a go. And I
Mm.
joined Accenture and their graduate scheme in August 2008. And as you can imagine, it was kind of an interesting time to go into the commercial world. It's kind of on the back of the financial crisis, etc. And
Yeah.
there were a lot of things going on. There was a number of redundancies, and work was slower than normal. So although I wanted to explore other industries apart from healthcare, I ended up working on a healthcare project and kind of have been in healthcare ever since. So
Ever
in
since.
hindsight, it was absolutely the right decision to do. And I love healthcare and I love the NHS. I just needed to find the right thing to do within it.
Yeah. No, that's very interesting. Ams also wanted to become a cardiothoracic surgeon before kind of delving into the creator economy, starting his own startup. Tell us a bit about kind of the role you were doing as a consultant in that time, which was a very difficult period for the world on a global scale. And despite the difficulty, What was it that made you stick around in the world of kind of a non-clinical role?
Yeah, so I think one of the key things, as I mentioned earlier on, was my kind of need for the work to be varied. And what I
Mm,
found with consulting and the kind of roles I was doing is that there was always opportunity for me to try things out. Whether that's kind of a technology role, or more of a kind of a strategy or advisory role. So I had the opportunity to kind of do different things every few months. So it kept my curiosity alive, and it kept me engaged from that perspective.
mm,
And I think the other element was that I found that consulting was a way that you could have a bigger impact than in some ways in clinical practice, where you're focused on a smaller group of people, where with certain roles within consulting, you could do things, and you could implement solutions, and help people at a slightly larger scale, which is also attractive. And I think
mm,
finally, Accenture was a great place to start my career. I met a number of great people, and learned a lot. So from a skills and capability perspective, I was learning something new every day, and looking back, I learned a lot of really good sort of foundational skills that's really helped me until today.
Janak, a question here. So we've talked a little bit about consultancy, and we've had other clinicians turned consultants on this podcast. I just wanted to ask, so you mentioned that you did a bit of freelance consulting for companies as well. That's the first I've come across where you've done it solo and on your own. Tell us a little bit what that involves, and then what is it? What's the difference between when you do it on your own versus with a company?
Yeah, so there was a period of time when, after doing my MBA, I did some freelance consulting work. So, which effectively means, as you say, working by yourself, and taking on sort of contract roles to go and help another consulting firm, or another organization with a project for a sort of a defined period of time.
mm,
And I think, again, after my MBA, I was yes, not 100% sure what exactly I wanted to do. So I wanted
Mm,
a bit of flexibility in terms of being able to sort of try different things, and have some flexibility in the type of work I did, and who I work for. And also, it was a time I had quite my kids were very well. My son was very young, so it also gave me a little bit of flexibility in terms of
amazing.
working a little bit more from home, etc. So I think those two things kind of drove
mm,
me to kind of look at that. And I think obviously, it has those kind of positives. And obviously on the flip side, there's always a kind of, it's not as secure as having a
Absolutely.
full-time job. And I think also what I found towards end of my time doing that was I missed being kind of part of a team, and part of an organization helping build something. So there's
Mm.
always sort of positives, negatives to anything. But yeah, it kind of was really useful, and I enjoyed the work I did at that time.
mm. Tell us a bit more about the transition to then taking a leadership role in this digital health company, Mindwave Ventures. You are the operating officer and then became CEO, which is obviously a different skill set to what you're doing as a freelancer, what you're doing in Accenture. Tell us how the opportunity came about, and kind of what the role entailed, and how you kind of did within that.
Sure. So since kind of doing my MBA, my interest in startups and sort of technology generally had sort of grown. So while I was doing my MBA, I got involved in that sort of whole startup ecosystem in Cambridge, got involved with sort of advising startups, and also kind of tried a few things of my own in terms of just sort of understanding what those things were like. So I had always kind of had this curiosity, or kind of desire to try what it would be like to work in a startup. So that was one big motivation. And I had met the founder some time before I joined the company, and he had Kumar had a really interesting background. He had worked in the video gaming industry, and had this vision of applying some of those principles around focusing on users and their needs, and building solutions around that. to healthcare. And they were at that stage where they needed sort of my skill set to kind of do some things and scale up. So it was a perfect opportunity to kind of join a startup and a company that I believe was doing some important work. And we were doing a bunch of work based around user-centered design, helping healthcare organizations explore challenges and then co-design and co-develop digital health solutions with users. And we were also developing our own product, which was a open source patient health record, which enable users to access their medical records, add to it, and share it with healthcare professionals and family. And looking back at that time, I think there was a very kind of a transformative time for me from a functional perspective. I learned a lot of new skills from the kind of user-centered research, digital health, and because we had a large technology team working with us to build products, that was the kind of first real experience I had of sort of end-to-end designing, building, and implementing and rolling out a digital health solution. And from a leadership perspective, especially when I was CEO, it was quite scary because you feel in that position you feel quite exposed, and you do need to be aware of things that you're good at and see how you can maximize that. And you also need to be aware of things that perhaps you're not as good as naturally, and then see how you can work with your mentors and wider team to kind of mitigate those things that you're not good as, and sort of make the best of the team around you. So yeah, it's a really kind of interesting and sort of transformative time for me personally. And I think one of the biggest lessons I learned when I was at Mindwave and during those roles is the kind of importance of team buy-in, by which I mean, how do you, as a leader, how do you set the vision so it's clear to everybody where the organization and where you want the organization to be heading, and how to tell that story with the kind of real why behind it, so that everybody can understand, believe in it, and be excited by it. Because especially in teams where, especially actually outside in consulting, the team can be a very very varied mix of people with different personalities from all walks of life, and different levels and different things that motivate them when it comes to work and careers. So team buy-in becomes even more important in these scenarios, and that particular skill set, which I'm continuing to refine, has been a really important thing as I sort of went on to different roles and kind of progressed up different organizations.
I think you're probably one of the first few guests that mentioned about the importance of having a team buy-in. A lot of people talk about leadership, listening, vision, and guidance. Tell us, and I think it is actually very important, tell us the things other founders or other CEOs can do to encourage the team buy-in. What were the things that you found to be successful?
Yeah, sure, Abdul. So I think one of the key things is to, for example, you as a CEO, or you as a founder, or you as a leader in the organization probably have a very clear view. Okay, this is where the organization needs to go, and I'm really passionate about it because of these reasons. So you need to be able to sort of explain that in a way that the team kind of understands why it's important, and also sometimes customize it a little bit depending on who you're talking to, so that you can align it with what that they're interested in and they're motivated in, right? Because you may be really interested in the vision of a company, or what you want to do with the product, because that's always what you wanted to do, but that's not necessarily going to excite everybody in your team, and not everybody's going to buy into that. But they may be really interested in the impact that's going to have on patient outcomes, or it might really help them learn a particular skill, or kind of grow in their role. So it kind of really depends on what individuals are looking for and what their motivation. So I think to be able to clearly articulate that vision, and to be able to sort of tell the story to the team in a way that actually is meaningful to them, is, I think, one of the key things in getting team buy-in, right? And I think on a more practical level, when it comes to kind of delivery of your vision, it's about sort of organizing your team, giving them kind of roles and responsibilities that align to what they want to do, and also is kind of respective of their talents and their capabilities, is also I found really, really important, because you can't do everything by yourself, and you need to really make sure that you give the team opportunities, but in a supported way, and actually take the team along with you on that journey.
No, I think that's very interesting, and thank you for sharing those tips.
On that point, right, of giving people responsibility, letting them exercise their talents, right? Now, as a founder, you'll find that the company feels like it's your baby, right? You want to look after it, you want to do everything for it, but you have to delegate some things. How do you delegate a task yet make sure it's done to the best of its sort of quality without stepping on the person's toes? So you've got someone really talented, they want to take it really far, but you need to also sort of make sure it's still going in the right direction. How do you do that?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's something that I've often sort of grappled with in consulting roles, not just in kind of startup world. And also it probably doubly difficult because often I can be quite a perfectionist. So it's always like, oh, I want to do this because I know that I'll do it just the way I want it to. May not be the best way, but at least I do it the way I want to. So it's always a balance, right? And it's something that I've worked on personally over the years, which is to kind of find the right balance in terms of giving people opportunity, making sure they have the right skills, and you coach them and you support them, and then also having the right level of check-ins, to make sure that things are going well, that they're comfortable with where things are going, and also to an extent you're comfortable with where things are heading, so that you can gradually push people as you go along, rather than give them sort of too much leeway, and then things don't go quite the way, and you have to kind of course correct later on, which can be a little more messier. So I think it's just finding the right balance between giving people space, opportunity, support, and then having a level of sort of dialogue and check in to make sure things are going well, because the reality is, and you don't want to be like the sort of single sort of bottleneck in making things happen within your company, especially as you scale up or as you grow. You have to rely on your team to help you. And I think having that culture of sort of giving responsibility and trusting people to do stuff helps, because then you almost have your kind of immediate team around you, and then they do the same thing with their team, and you can kind of multiply that onwards. So yeah, it's not easy, it's a balance, and sometimes you have to do a bit of trial and error to find out like what works and what you're comfortable with. I think different people will have different sort of kind of levels of control versus
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
And tell us a bit more about Content AI. You were analyst, consulting, then in chief executive positions, and then co-founding an AI company of your own. Tell us a bit more about that transition and kind of advice to other people that are building in AI, because it's such a hot topic. I know AI has been around for a while, but it seems to have been catching a buzz. How has that experience been for you, and any advice you can share to other founders?
Yeah, sure. So again, it came about from my sort of time during my MBA, where I was kind of interested in starting to get more involved in startups, not my own. And as I mentioned, I grew up in Sri Lanka and had sort of family. I still have family back there. So I've always kind of maintained close ties with Sri Lanka, and I visit often. And during that time after my MBA, I kind of tried a few things in terms of few projects, and had loads of conversations with people that are active within the startup ecosystem in Sri Lanka. And during one of those conversations and sort of chance meetings, I came across CD, one of my co-founders, and we had some good conversations about AI, which is and some of the things he wanted to do with it, and we got on really well. and I was excited to set up something with him and his other sort of co-founder, Samira. And so that's how it got started, not necessarily by design,
Of course.
but we met, and I think we got along, and it was interesting what he wanted to do, and I guess that's how it got started. So I guess in terms of kind of tips in terms of startups and founders, I think one of the key things is to kind of figure out what problem you're trying to solve, and make sure that whatever you're trying to do, it kind of has that kind of product market fit. And I think the second thing related to that is kind of be flexible and ready to pivot. When we kind of set up Conscient a long time ago, we were more focused on developing a product, but then along the way we realized there's a lot of value we can add from a sort of a more of a services perspective, and helping other companies kind of develop their own kind of AI products or AI sort of solutions to meet their challenges. So we kind of pivoted along to that, and that's been sort of successful on the back of that. And I think going back to some of the other things we discussed about the team and buy-in, I think especially when it's a startup, it depends so much on that core team, how you can get on with each other and supplement and complement each other's skill set. And as you grow, it's about creating that culture that kind of embodies that values of the business that you set up, so you can scale efficiently without diluting the core values. So you get all those tensions about it was previously 3 people, now it's 10 or whatever. Like how do you make sure that new people kind of do the things to the same quality or with the same passion that you do? So there's some groundwork to be done around how do you set up that culture from the beginning to make sure as you scale that that kind of original vision and the values that you have are kind of transmitted along with the kind of newer joinees.
Having done kind of the entrepreneurial stuff, exec, what kind of made you go back into the industry again? So, you're one of the directors kind of at the Health Data Informatics and Analytics at KPMG. Tell us a bit more about that transition and what you do in that role. Because sometimes we hear these titles and roles, but a lot of clinicians don't really understand what it is. Like, what are you doing on a day-to-day basis, or what does the role look like?
Yeah, I was thinking about this the other day. So actually, first of all, as it happens, the timing worked out really well. I was getting towards the end of my master's in data science. I was wrapping up my book, and I was sort of really interested on the back of both those things to focus more on the health data side of things. And KPMG was looking for somebody to come in and kind of help lead and grow the health data and analytics business and the team. So that was one thing, kind of a timing thing. And I think secondly, I think a lot of the things I've done in my quite varied career, I think from consulting to operational roles to startup roles, has kind of provided me with skills and experience that made me a really good fit for that particular role at KPMG, both in terms of kind of the core consulting skills I had picked up in kind of large consulting firms, small firms, and also freelancing, and also from the kind of a health tech and data skills perspective that helped with some specific elements of the role, which I can tell you a little bit more about. It was a really, really good fit. So the kind of timing and the fit of the role, and I've always enjoyed the kind of the variation and the kind of intellectual stimulation that you get from consulting roles. All those things put together made the kind of the role and transition back into consulting kind of a really, really good one for me. And in terms of, you asked me like what I do in my role at KPMG. So in the data and analytics space, we focus on 3 areas really. The first area is about helping clients think about how to make the best use of their data and to develop an associated data strategy to realize the benefits and improve citizen outcomes. So there's been a lot of national policies, where that's kind of data saves lives, Gold Acre report, and a lot of national initiatives around, whether that's kind of the federated data platform or secure data environments. And it's important for like integrated care systems and NHS trusts to really understand how all of this fits together and what it means for them at a local level. So we work with kind of integrated care systems and trusts to help them understand this better, and how data can help them deliver their overarching kind of corporate or organizational strategies. And that includes kind of developing prioritized roadmaps of key initiatives that they need to implement to get from where they are now to where they want to be. So that's the kind of first bit, which is more a traditional sort of consulting or advisory work. The second area is around implementation. So a lot of the NHS trusts still rely on what I call descriptive analytics, where the focus is on analyzing events that are occurred in the past. So, for example, it could be like, maybe looking at a PowerPoint presentation or kind of a PDF report of like, length of stay from 3-4 weeks ago. And due to challenges in kind of bringing together, cleansing and managing data, some of these data, is quite old. And also, there are sometimes issues with the quality of the data, etc. So my experience is that, apart from a few organizations that are leading the way, for many, the focus should be on getting some of these fundamentals right. So that could be around data governance or data infrastructure, for example, transitioning onto modern data platforms. So another important area right now is developing the capability of the workforce to equip them with the skills and confidence and the ability to kind of adopt a different mindset that is needed. So we work with organizations through our unique analytics learning program to help them develop both technical and non-technical skills to better equip them for this kind of evolving data and technology landscape in the NHS. And for them to effectively enable some of the national initiatives like intelligence functions at a integrated care system level, which is more about focusing on taking a population health management approach to taking care of patients. So that's the kind of second area, which is more around implementation and translation of some of that data strategy and advisory work. The third area is a really unique one, and one that I find really interesting, and this is where we identify a common problem that our clients face, and we develop a repeatable solution. Is effectively a product that we can deploy quickly to help. So, for example, we've developed a great product that helps hospitals with their strategic workforce planning, which helps them understand their current baseline, but also do some scenario planning to understand what their demand might be in the future, and what that has in terms of impact on their workforce, what the gaps are, and what it means in terms of recruitment, retirement, retention, etc. And it also helps them understand some of the costs associated with these changes and what they need to do to potentially plug these gaps. And we're now kind of developing a number of other products, for example, to help organizations better manage their patient pathways, and to help them make operational and patient safety improvements more efficiently. So this third area is something quite unique in consulting firms, and my varied experience of working in startups and working in digital health solution development actually really helped me fit in quite nicely with that third element.
I can definitely see how it lends itself to the new role.
Janak, so a lot of your projects and what you do involves a lot of interaction, engagement with the healthcare providers, the NHS, hospitals, I imagine, GPs, I imagine, right? Companies, I imagine. Now, we have a lot of listeners who are clinicians who are looking to sort of start to engage on sort of systems and processes at that sort of level. At what touch points are clinicians valuable for you, and where can they get involved in sort of feeding back to you so you can have that sort of collaborative sort of approach to building these products and handling data and moving forward with the times, basically?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think there's probably two elements to it. So we do have a large community of clinicians within KPMG from different sort of medical, nursing, and allied health professional, pharmacy background. So when we're whenever we are kind of thinking about solving a problem for our clients or coming up with a new solution, we tend to work closely with our internal community first to make sure that we involve them and we get the experiences that they have. And I think our approach to developing products has and always will be taking very much of a co-developing approach with the NHS in terms of making sure that we work with them to really, really understand, what problems they're having, whether that's a operational issue or an issue from a clinical perspective on the front line. So, for example, in that situation, we would want to engage with the users that are actually having those problems to really, really understand, what the problem is, what actual impact that has on their, clinical work in terms of workload or kind of additional issues that it causes them. And then we would work with them to come up with a solution and to test and iterate some of the ideas and solutions we have, just to make sure that it'll actually work in that environment. And I think B is also to make sure we bring them along the journey with us to make sure we have their buy-in and support, because success of a product on the front line really needs for it to actually solve the problem without causing additional problems or kind of knock-on effects somewhere else, but also clinical champions and champions from an operational perspective to kind of help with the kind of implementation side of things. So yeah, whichever way we kind of whether it's a product or whether it's a project, we tend to take a very kind of a user-focused way of in terms of the identifying problem and then working with the kind of clinicians and other operational and non-operational staff to make sure we understand the problem properly, and then we come up with a solution that's actually going to work.
No, absolutely, definitely, and that's very reassuring to hear. And it makes sense to have this co-developing, collaborative approach. The one thing I do want to touch on, which is slightly different to the career path many people have taken with you, is tell us a bit more about publishing a book. You don't often hear people in this world publish a book about, they might write a newsletter, they might write a blog. How come you went ahead and, published a whole book?
Yeah. Again, I think it wasn't necessarily kind of planned it to happen exactly like that. I think I've always kind of been intrigued by the idea of, what would it be like to publish a book. And as I got into my master's and I, kind of was working in the space of AI and startups, I was getting more and more involved in that space. And one of the things I was seeing was that there was obviously a lot of excitement about AI in terms of what it could do and how it could help sort of improve healthcare operations and patient outcomes. But the reality was, if you looked if I kind of looked on the ground on the core phase, there wasn't many kind of AI solutions that were kind of deployed at scale, making an impact. So I was curious to kind of see, well, okay, is there real potential, or is it all hype? And if there is potential, why is that potential not translating to sort of scale, impact at scale on the front line? So that's sort of why what got me thinking, and I had a few conversations and I kind of had a look around. I think there's a lot of sort of good publications and reports and books, but I felt like a lot of them covered part of the puzzle, and some of it was more theoretical and kind of quite sort of academically peer-reviewed papers, etc. So, I was interested in sort of the more practical implementation side of things. So I wanted to kind of explore that from a sort of a pragmatic perspective, and also kind of talk to a lot of people who have gone through some of those experiences and could tell me like what the kind of reality was. So I wanted to write a book that took a more kind of a implementation approach and sort of look at some of the real life examples of startup founders, founders and people that work in the NHS, frontline staff, as well as sort of operational management staff. So that's how I kind of almost fell into it. It was kind of, again, good timing, because I was kind of already doing stuff within that space and thinking about those things. So I already were talking to the kind of right people that I needed to have access to kind of write a sensible book. So that's how it got started, and I think kind of went from there. It was a lot of hard work, and especially when I was because I kind of did it while I was doing the masters. But I think my kind of rationale was because I was already in that, my head was already in that space. It kind of made sense to kind of do it in parallel. And it was hard work, but really enjoyed it. And in hindsight, I'm really, really glad I did it. It's kind of enabled me to go and have follow-on conversations, and obviously be on this podcast and others.
Of course.
I think it gives me an opportunity to kind of share my insights from the book, and hopefully find it helpful.
No, definitely. Conscious of time, the last question I had was, there's a theme of a lot of opportunities came your way and you took those opportunities and you ran with them. A lot of people have lots of opportunities, but they stick to their day job. They kind of go for that, the career that's already set for them. Whereas you've had lots of different opportunities. You always seem to be at the right place at the right time. So I think the last question to kind of wrap this up will be your advice on how do you increase the surface area for opportunities? What can you do to get the opportunities that you have been fortunate enough to get in your career?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, I think there's a couple of things, right? So, I mean, sadly, a lot of medics come up to me these days, either LinkedIn or events, and say, look, not really happy either with clinical practice, I want to leave. What do I need to do, right? So it's sad because it's not what it should be like. And I think in terms of thinking about alternative careers and like as you say, like kind of making the most of opportunities that come to you, I think it's about sort of the kind of outlook you have, right? So I think you got to be open and open to sort of ideas and new things, but that's easier said than done. And I think it's then the way to make that easier is to actually take your time to explore and go and talk to people. And what I say almost is like and there's a lot more opportunity to do that now compared to when I left medicine 14 years ago, where that was still quite a rare thing to do. So I think there's a lot more opportunity these days to kind of dabble effectively, right? Like, volunteer with a startup, do a few days here and there, kind of to build out a portfolio career. So I think it's hard to like know necessarily like if at first up like, oh, medicine is not, clinical practice is not for me, I want to go and do exactly this other thing. So I think what I always say is like, take the time to explore. It's there's probably no right answer. You probably don't know it. No other person probably can tell you what it is either. So take the time to explore. As I say, dabble. Try a few different things out, and there's lots of opportunity and lots of kind of ways of doing that. And I think then think about like what elements of clinical practice do you like, and which bits do you not like as much? Because surprisingly, and hindsight is always a wonderful thing. And when I look back, there's lots of things I learned as a FI1 or FI2 I didn't really think much of at that time, but you can kind of reflect back and say, oh, actually that's when I really started to think about problem solving, or this is how I learned how to prioritize things. You don't think about it when you're doing it. And I think sometimes when you're doing clinical medicine, you often not very good at sort of stepping out of your role and thinking, okay, what are transferable things? So I think that's something is really worthwhile doing, because one of the other things that'll come out of that is for you to start thinking about, okay, these are the elements I like within clinical practice, and these are the transferable things. So if I'm looking for another role, is it that I need to do something different within clinical practice, or do I kind of still keep doing some of the clinical practice that I enjoy doing, but then supplement that with a non-clinical role that actually means that I get to do more of the things that I don't currently enjoy or get a chance to do within clinical practice. Because I was reading an article one of my friends wrote recently, actually on Mustafa, who wrote an article for you guys recently, and he was talking about the fact that just because you're in health tech doesn't mean that you be coding, right? And I guess on a similar vein, that just because you're doing consultancy doesn't mean you're working with spreadsheets all the time. So there's kind of like things that you need to kind of go beyond the kind of or the stereotypes, or kind of get really good understanding of the variety that exists outside clinical medicine, and then kind of really figure out what you want to do. And I think the final thing I would say, I left at a time very early on in my career. I think what I find is that as you as you're later in your career, you there's always a balance of risk and reward, right? So like for me to be at FI2, it was like, if it didn't work out, I could come back, and it didn't have a massive financial impact for me or anything like that. So I think as you become more progressed in your career, there's more considerations, right? Because you might have a family, or you might have a mortgage, etc. So those things do you have to take those things into account as well, because you got to be pragmatic, and you got to be sensible about decisions you make as well. So that's the other kind of thing to consider. But coming back to your kind of original question, I think have open mind, explore the opportunities, so what the what the kind of spectrum of opportunities are, and then really spend some time figuring out like what you like, what you don't like as much, and what are the things you can transfer out of your experience so far, because that'll help you figure out what could work for you, because you might not get it first time around, and you might have to try things out, and figure out almost like a stage transition, if you like.
No, definitely. Thank you for sharing that advice. And I think you're a very good example of opportunities, doing lots of different things. And, there's a whole world outside of clinical medicine, being a doctor, being a clinician. So we want to thank you, Janak, for taking the time out to kind of share your story, share kind of those pivots, those transitions. And thank you to our listeners, as always, for tuning in every week.
Thanks both for having me on the podcast.